Cuban crime syndicates have re-emerged in the state of Florida again. Usually these organized crime syndicates only have a strong presence during economical recessions. We know that during the 2007 and 2008 era, Southwest Florida became a crap hole of organized crime. Just on Tuesday, 3/18, this Cuban was arrested in Bradenton, Florida for stealing from a construction site. The same day, just a few miles away in Sarasota, this man of Hispanic origin with a Miami address was trying to cash a check of over $50,000 fraudulently at a bank. A man was just arrested in Tampa, Florida for having 8 stolen dump trucks. These are the Cuban gangs, criminal syndicates that are causing the largest damage across the United States in the total number of stolen property. But what is a crime syndicate and what type of crimes do they engage in? It's kind of complicated, but I'll try my best to explain it. Here you have 6 different rackets that are working together as a syndicate or a confederation of criminals. All these criminal franchises are part of the same syndicate. They're loosely affiliated. It's not exactly a gang because they're not part of the same unit. They are individual entities that at times work together to collaborate in criminal activity, but they're not exactly a gang because there's no solidification among them, thus the term a confederacy or a criminal syndicate. It's something like a loose criminal network with no particular branding like a gang and no particular hierarchy like a mafia. If you were to zoom out, you see that these criminal networks are linked into other criminal networks. It's very difficult for law enforcement to disintegrate these networks through collaborations like in a gang. And that is because people within the network only have outflow of their criminal activity but not inflow. But in the case of this network, the person who does credit card fraud may have a fancy watch. He can sell it to a doctor in that network. They can also buy fuel with fake credit cards and sell it to other people in the network, including those working in transportation. Now, each one of these particular blocks of this syndicate has a very specific role. The person who's transporting moves goods from one city to the next. The person in the theft ring obtains materials that everybody else needs. The person in the credit card does the same exact thing. The person staging car accidents also has a huge role. Then you have the clinics, doctors, and pain medications. All these networks work together. They all depend on each other, but they're loosely affiliated. Now, Cuban crime syndicates have a foothold in Louisville, Kentucky, Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, Texas, Denver, Colorado, Miami, Tampa, and Fort Myers. In the late 90s, Cubans started to arrive in Louisville, Kentucky. Today, there are over 20,000 Cubans in the Louisville area. While most Cubans are good, hard-working people, you have a few individuals like Rosana Leiva. She was literally charged for being part of a criminal syndicate. That's an actual name for a crime, engaging in criminal activity. She was born in Cuba. This is Joel. His criminal record is so extensive, it takes up more than one page. These are just some of the charges he has, ranging from possession of stolen property to murder and an immigration hold. One of the key factors that makes these Cuban crime syndicates different than other criminal organizations is how big the licks are. They go for the big dollars. This is Danny Torres, a Cuban arrested in Louisville, Kentucky on some shoplifting related charges that totaled somewhere between $25,000 to $2.2 million. This is Angel. He's a Hispanic in Louisville, Kentucky, but he was born in the United States. Perhaps his parents were Cuban. He was charged with over $100,000 worth of stolen property, perhaps easily into the millions, and engaging in organized crime. These are only some of the criminal charges against him. The list is so extensive you would have to scroll down to see it all. But basically, this young man is engaging in millions of dollars worth of criminal activity. Many of the individuals engaging in these Cuban crime syndicates are young Cubans born in the United States or Cubans that are recent arrivals. That kind of summarizes the general composition of these criminal activities. Overall, Louisville, Kentucky has a seriously high homicide rate with over 140 people every year being killed, and many times many of those homicides that happen in Louisville have something to do with the Cuban crime syndicates. Kentucky also has one of the highest overdose and consumption rates of anywhere in the United States, and that's where key elements like transportation come into play with these criminal networks. This is Adrian, another Cuban arrested in Louisville, Kentucky. Like many others, his criminal charges are so extensive that you would have to scroll down to see it all. Some of his criminal charges include possession of stolen property, owning stolen property, engaging in criminal activities, tampering with VIN numbers and registrations. Why is it that now all of a sudden there's this explosion of crime among the Cuban community? Just like many large cities in the United States lost population during COVID, the same thing happened in Cuba. Between 2021 and 2024, Cuba lost 8% of its population. Now, among immigrant communities, Cubans used to have a good reputation of being among the ones that kind of assimilated best to American culture. However, this last and most recent and largest wave of Cuban migrants is third-generation communist people. These are individuals that have been under communism for so long that they've been engraved with many of the bad and negative traits that that type of society can breed. Fraud and scamming really are some of the few ways that people can survive in Cuba, a country with extraordinarily limited resources. Cuba is now among the poorest and most economically deprived places on earth. And to aggravate the situation, in November 2021, Nicaragua allowed visa-free travel from Cuba. This meant that Cubans leaving the island wouldn't have to take the perilous journey across the ocean and could fly directly to Nicaragua and make a safer land journey to the United States. So let's understand, COVID hits, Nicaragua allows visa-free travel, and over 800,000 Cubans decide to take that flight to Nicaragua and try to reach the United States. Now, the Cuban passport is among one of the weakest in the world, and Nicaragua would have provided the easiest access to the United States. With the wet foot, dry foot law, all Cubans had to do was reach the United States, and they were allowed to be here legally. Cubans had always had a privileged status among immigrants that all they had to do was show up here and they were instantly legal. But these new changes in 2017 meant that Cubans coming to the United States now were coming through criminal networks, human trafficking through Latin America, like most other immigrants. Now, there's a correlation between the stock market and Cubans coming to the United States without a visa. For some reason that I don't understand, these things correlate perfectly. But basically, the idea is that when the stock market is up, Cubans are coming to the United States. And when the stock market is in decline, Cubans are no longer coming to the United States. Now, people don't like to hear this, but when immigrants stop coming into the United States, you get a recession. I'm not saying you have to like that, but it's the facts of life. Now, we are currently about to enter a recession, and we know that because the number of immigrants coming to the United States in 2025 has kind of came to a stop. We know that immigrants are going to stop coming to the United States and we're going to enter a recession. The problem is the crime wave that comes during these recessions. Now, back in the 2007s, 2008s, most of the Cuban crime syndicates were focused on cultivation. Now, in 2012 to 2014, Colorado goes through the process of legalization. Practically the entire system of Cuban crime syndicates that were in Florida back then engaging in cultivation moved to Denver, Colorado, and we have not had this problem since. Colorado's legalization meant that Cubans could facilitate their transportation and all of their other criminal logistics in Colorado, and they abandoned the trade in Florida. At the time, places like Golden Gate Estates, Lehigh Acres were seeing as many as 100 grow houses busted every single year. They knew how to grow it. They had the equipment, they had the experience, they had the networks. The way these networks were cultivating in Colorado wasn't exactly legal, but it was a better legal cover to cultivate. Thus, when Colorado legalizes, Most of these networks that used to be in Florida moved to Colorado. Literally in that time period, the Cuban criminal syndicates would let you live for free in a house in Colorado. They would pay the rent if you just let them work the house. So at that time, it was a profitable practice. But over time, we know what happened in Colorado and with the prices. Many people say that today the market is saturated. It isn't as profitable today as it was back then because there's too much competition. Since the start of COVID, Florida's economy took an explosion. People from New York, California, and many other states moved to Florida, leading to one of the state's fastest development stages and leading to many areas like Fort Myers, Northport, Sarasota, Ocala find themselves among the fastest growing regions in the country by population growth. It seemed like literally everybody wanted to live in Florida, and cities in Florida started to have as much as 10% population increases in a 2-year period. And new home construction became a demanding industry where people were needed to build homes. They simply couldn't build houses fast enough in this period after COVID, when the influx of people to Florida was great and the need for new home construction was at an all-time high. But then all that came to an end. Florida cities practically became a ghost town overnight. SB 1718, the governor's immigration law, turned cities like Fort Myers that were prospering into complete ghost towns. The vacuum left behind was filled in by gang feuds and gang violence as people fought over the new territories that were created, as immigrant communities vacated, and the areas that used to be predominantly Hispanic shift to a predominantly poor white area, making these areas prime dealing territory. Combined with a peak in overdoses in the state of Florida and a rash of gang-related shootings and violence throughout the entire state, they realized that the jobs that they had in California and New York paid much better. Despite the fact that Florida saw population growth, income growth never kept up. And just as Florida passes heavy anti-immigration laws, the state gets hit back-to-back with hurricanes that require massive cleanup efforts. Cleanup efforts that before, when there was a large Hispanic migrant community, would have been the work of less than 1 year. Hurricane cleanups in Florida usually took between 6 to 9 months, but now, with nobody to work, these cleanup efforts turn into years and years of garbage and devastation, turning towns into practical apocalypse landscapes of homeless people living in abandoned buildings. The aftermath of hurricanes, combined with the onslaught of overdoses and homelessness, turned Florida into an eyesore that people wanted to move away from more than move to. At a time where interest rates were rising, many people discovered that their new Florida bought properties were starting to pay more for insurance than they were for mortgage. Insurance companies disappeared, leaving people with destroyed homes that were practically unsellable. As 2024 turned into 2025, real estate markets like Fort Myers started to see an increase in price reductions as more properties were hitting the market than were being sold. The frenzy was over, the interest rates were high, the vacancy began, the decline had started. Let's not forget that many people in Florida's Cuban community depended heavily on income from new home construction, as this is the largest employer in many of the areas like Lehigh Acres, Fort Myers, Northport. Areas that had seen the fastest growth had become the most dependent for their income on new home construction that is now practically paralyzed in Florida. And this is where we are now, that many Hispanics in Florida and new arrivals are finding that their sources of income have dried up. On top of that, many people who have legitimate businesses are discovering that their customers have practically dried up with the new immigration raids, leaving Hispanic neighborhoods looking like ghost towns, storefronts empty, and businesses wondering how they're going to pay the bills. Back in December, 2 individuals from Cape Coral were arrested in Collier County, the Naples area, for using a controlled it's hard to believe it. They used a remote control device to steal fuel. If you've ever been on a road in Florida, you understand that there's a lot of commercial equipment here, and all that requires a lot of fuel. And these individuals use fake stolen credit cards or remote control devices, in this case, to steal the fuel and resell it in a black market. Just back in October, a man in the Orlando area trying to steal fuel started a fire at a gas station in Central Florida. The 8 stolen dump trucks in Hillsborough County, Florida, that's the Tampa area, is just the latest of an onslaught of crimes that are usually related to Cuban crime syndicates. Basically, there is no doubt that the crime syndicates that left Florida by 2014 are now back in the state on a massive scale. Now, back in the late 2000s, cultivation was at the heart of Cuban crime syndicates, but that's no longer a relevant industry in the United States. There wouldn't be enough time on today's video to go over every single arrest coming out of Florida of these individuals that are stealing fuel in the state. We get the idea that it's become very prevalent. Legalization was on the ballot in Florida last year, and had legalization became a thing, that was the only thing that got rid of these criminal syndicates in Florida. It would have been a huge incentive for them to return to the state if the reason they left the state was no longer a problem. Because of staged car accidents, people in South Florida are having to pay more for car insurance than anybody else. The same thing can be said for commercial vehicle insurance in Florida, where insuring these vehicles in Florida costs considerably more than in other states. Credit card fraud is also on the rise in Florida. Just a month ago, a traffic stop on 75 led to the arrest of a Tampa duo who had car skimming devices in possession. These individuals were cloning fake credit cards and using them to steal in the state of Florida. Many times, these types of crimes do one single thing, which is to drive up the cost of insurance for everybody. One of the main reasons people have started to flee the state of Florida is because the ridiculous cost of insurance. Without a doubt, the volume of people engaging in fraudulent activities in the state is one of the main reasons why insurance in this state has become so impossible to afford. Let's take a look at an individual who was arrested in Sarasota, Florida. Now, this individual, his residence is listed as living in a high-rise building in downtown Miami. This is Carlo Padilla. He is a resident of Miami, Florida, that was arrested in Sarasota. His charges are as follows: fraud over $50,000, money laundering over $100,000, using somebody else's ID to obtain money without consent over $50,000, fraud and swindle a financial institution. Now, this individual is born in the United States. The Sarasota Police Department provides his address. Look at the building where this guy was living. Look at the view this guy has. Do you think this is a normal salary to live in a place like this? And this is how this guy is living on scheming and defrauding in Florida. Throughout the entirety of Florida, hardworking Cubans get up every single day and provide for their families and help make their communities a better place. But unfortunately, as of right now in 2025, many of the recent arrivals or the children of people who are just becoming young adults are choosing to take from society something that doesn't belong to them on a massive scale. As a Cuban myself, it's embarrassing that every time I hear a news story about credit card fraud, I already know who committed the crime. When I hear about a dump truck or a semi being stolen, I already know they're Cuban. When I hear about somebody stealing fuel or diesel, I already know they're Cuban. When you hear about fraud and scamming on a large degree, they're almost always Cuban. It's really embarrassing that these individuals are giving Cubans, a hardworking people, just a bad name in the United States. Of course, not everybody scamming in Florida is a Cuban. This man right here from South Carolina found himself in Naples, Florida, out of all places, trying to force a homeless person to cash a fraudulent $43,000 check. He figured he could just grab a homeless person, pay them, and almost force them to walk into a bank and commit this crime for him in Naples, Florida, out of all places. Neither a black person nor a homeless person is going to cash a check that large in Naples, Florida without some special scrutiny. Of course, he doesn't have enough brain cells to figure out where he was or what he was doing, and he is now arrested. So, of course, not every idiot out there is a Cuban, but unfortunately, many times it seems like Cubans are at the forefront of scheming and defrauding in the state of Florida. With the collapse of Florida's economy and new home construction, we can expect to see a lot of people in Florida who have dug themselves into an economical nightmare of a living situation to commit crimes to keep up a lifestyle that simply isn't sustainable. And even when law enforcement shows up and catches a theft ring like this guy here with a Cummins engine that's stolen, they can only disintegrate so much of the network, because the crazy thing about these Cuban crime syndicates is that crime syndicates are just loose confederacies of individuals who engage in criminal activities. And while they work as a network, it is impossible to bring them down as a network. Law enforcement has to catch these individuals one by one committing crimes that overall contribute to the network, but law enforcement can never really dismantle these bands of thieves. During the last recession of 2007 and 2008, nowhere in the United States was hit harder than Fort Myers and Las Vegas. These are the most vulnerable markets for economical collapse. When you start to see the occurrence of more and more crimes of this nature coming from criminal syndicates, you know that things are about to get really bad in Florida. Recently, while driving through Fort Myers, you could see that there are dump trucks just parked here in this parking lot. These are individuals who have a dump truck but don't have any work and are parking it here so that people who need them can come pick them up for work. Usually you'll see migrant workers sitting around waiting for work. You're also starting to see dump trucks sitting around waiting for work. This is only a sign of the times that we are in fact entering another economical recession, and another time period where these crime syndicates will flourish due to the necessity that families in Florida have. The state of Florida simply does not care to provide the people with enough income to make a decent living. Every day the laws in Florida make living here harder and harder for the average working class person. And that is perhaps why so many people in the state are choosing crime to provide for their families.